February 14th, 1977, 6:00 p.m. Hope Road, Kingston, Jamaica. Bob Dylan had come to Jamaica running from himself. His marriage to Sarah was crumbling. His recent albums had received mixed reviews, and he felt spiritually empty despite decades of success. He was staying in a rented house in the hills above Kingston, trying to write songs that wouldn't come, when an unexpected visitor changed the entire trajectory of his life. Bob Marley appeared at Dylan's door as the sun was setting over the Caribbean, carrying an acoustic guitar and wearing the serene smile that had become his trademark. "Brother Bob," Marley said in his musical Jamaican patois, "you look like a man who has lost his way to Zion." Dylan had met Marley briefly at a New York recording session the previous year, but they had never really talked. Now, standing in his doorway, Dylan saw something in Marley's eyes that he recognized but had lost, a deep spiritual peace that seemed to emanate from within. "Bob," Dylan replied, "I think I've lost my way to everything." What happened over the next 12 hours would transform Dylan's understanding of music, spirituality, and his own purpose as an artist, ultimately leading to one of the most controversial and powerful albums of his career. Marley stepped into Dylan's rented house and immediately sensed the heaviness that surrounded the American folk legend. The air felt thick with creative frustration and spiritual emptiness. "You know what your problem is, brother?" Marley said, settling into a chair and beginning to tune his guitar. "You've been trying to find God in your head instead of your heart." Dylan looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "In Rastafari, we believe that Jah lives within us. The divine isn't something you think about. It's something you experience. And sometimes, to quiet the mind enough to hear Jah's voice, you need a little help." Marley reached into a small leather pouch and withdrew what Dylan immediately recognized as marijuana, but unlike any he had ever seen. The herb was carefully prepared, almost ceremonial in its presentation. "This is not what you think it is," Marley explained, noticing Dylan's hesitation. "This isn't about getting high or escaping reality. In our faith, ganja is a sacrament. It opens the spiritual channels, helps you connect with the divine consciousness that's always been there." Dylan had experimented with various substances in the 1960s, but this felt different. Marley wasn't offering him drugs. He was offering him a religious experience. "I don't know, Bob. I'm not really in a good place right now." Marley smiled with infinite patience. "Brother, that's exactly when you most need to remember who you really are underneath all the noise." As the Jamaican evening descended around them, Marley prepared the ganja with the reverence of a priest preparing communion. He explained each step of the process, the prayers that accompanied the ritual, the respect for the herb as a gift from Jah. "In Rastafari," Marley said as he lit the carefully prepared joint, "we believe that ganja brings you closer to your true self, to Jah, to the universal love that connects all living things. But you must approach it with respect, with intention, with an open heart." Dylan watched Marley take a deep, reverent draw from the joint, then close his eyes in what appeared to be prayer. "What are you thinking about?" Dylan asked. "Gratitude," Marley replied. "Gratitude for this moment, for this gift, for the opportunity to share this sacred time with a brother who needs healing." When Marley passed the joint to Dylan, it felt like receiving communion. Dylan had never approached marijuana as anything more than recreational, but this felt entirely different. Ceremonial, spiritual, sacred. The first effects came slowly. Unlike the anxious, paranoid high Dylan had sometimes experienced, this felt like a gentle opening, as if doors in his consciousness were quietly swinging open to reveal rooms he had forgotten existed. Marley began playing his guitar, not any particular song, just gentle melodic patterns that seemed to weave through the evening air like prayers made audible. "How do you feel, brother?" Marley asked after about 30 minutes. Dylan was surprised to discover that he felt peaceful. For the first time in months, the constant noise in his head, the worries about his career, his marriage, his identity, had quieted to a whisper. "I feel quiet," Dylan said. "But not empty quiet. Full quiet, if that makes sense." Marley smiled. "That's Jah speaking, brother. That's the voice you've been trying so hard to hear." As the hours passed, something extraordinary began happening to Dylan's perception of music itself. When Marley played, Dylan didn't just hear the notes. He felt them as colors, as emotions, as living things that connected him to something vast and universal. The boundaries between himself and the music, between the music and the night air, between the night air and the cosmos, began to dissolve. "Bob," Dylan said around 10 p.m., his voice filled with wonder, "I think I'm starting to understand something I've never understood before." "What's that, brother?" "Music isn't something we create. It's something we discover, like it already exists somewhere, and we're just tuning in to receive it." Marley nodded with deep satisfaction. "Now you're beginning to see with Rasta eyes. Music is the voice of the divine, speaking through us when we're humble enough to get out of the way." Around midnight, Dylan picked up his own guitar and began playing. But what came out was unlike anything he had ever played before. The melodies seemed to flow from somewhere beyond his conscious mind, carrying with them a spiritual depth that surprised him. "I can feel something," Dylan said, his eyes closed as he played. "It's like there's a presence here with us." "There is," Marley said simply. "Jah is always present. The ganja just helps us remember to pay attention." As the night deepened, their conversation turned to questions Dylan had been struggling with for years. What was his purpose as an artist? How could he find meaning in a world that often felt meaningless? How could he reconnect with the divine inspiration that had once flowed through him so naturally? "In Rastafari," Marley explained, "we believe that every person has a divine mission. Your mission, Brother Bob, is to be a prophet through music. But you've been trying to prophesy from your ego instead of from your soul." "How do I prophesy from my soul?" Dylan asked. "By surrendering, by admitting that you don't have all the answers, and asking Jah to speak through you instead." Around 3 a.m., something profound happened. Dylan was playing a simple chord progression when suddenly he felt overwhelmed by a presence he couldn't name. It wasn't the ganja. This was something else, something that felt like pure love, washing through every cell of his body. "Bob," Dylan whispered, I think I'm having a religious experience." Marley looked at him with deep joy. "Yes, brother. You're remembering who you really are." Tears began streaming down Dylan's face as he continued playing. The music seemed to be playing itself now, and through it, he felt connected to something infinite and loving and real in a way he had never experienced before. "I can see it," Dylan said through his tears. "I can see the thread that connects everything. The music, the love, the purpose, the pain. It's all one thing. It's all divine. That's Jah consciousness, brother. That's what we've been trying to show you." For the next 6 hours, until sunrise, Dylan and Marley played music that seemed to come from another realm. They improvised songs about redemption, about divine love, about finding your way home to God. Dylan's voice took on qualities he had never heard before. more vulnerable, more surrendered, more open to something greater than himself. As dawn broke over Kingston, Dylan felt fundamentally changed. "Bob," he said to Marley, "I don't think I'll ever be the same." "You're not supposed to be the same," Marley replied. "Jah doesn't call us to stay the same. Jah calls us to grow, to transform, to become more than we thought possible." Dylan looked at the pages of lyrics he had written during the night. They were unlike anything he had ever written, more spiritual, more explicitly religious, more surrendered to divine will. "What do I do with this?" Dylan asked, holding up the papers. "You share it with the world. You let Jah speak through your music the way Jah spoke through you tonight." When Dylan returned to the United States several days later, he was a changed man. The spiritual awakening he had experienced with Marley in Jamaica had opened doors in his consciousness that could never be closed. Over the next year, Dylan would undergo a formal Christian conversion experience. But those who knew him said that the foundation for that transformation had been laid during those 12 hours with Bob Marley. The album that emerged from this spiritual awakening, Slow Train Coming, shocked Dylan's fans with its explicitly religious content. Many critics and longtime followers felt betrayed by Dylan's turn toward Christianity. But those who understood the deeper story recognized that Dylan hadn't abandoned his artistic integrity. He had finally found his authentic spiritual voice. Songs like "Gotta Serve Somebody" and "When He Returns" carried the same surrendered, spiritually opened quality that had first emerged during that night with Marley in Jamaica. Years later, when asked about Dylan's Christian period, Marley said in a 1980 interview, "Bob Dylan found Jah in his own way, through his own path. In Rastafari, we know that there are many rivers, but they all flow to the same sea. His Jesus and our Jah are the same divine love, speaking through different voices." Dylan rarely spoke directly about that night in Jamaica, but in 1985 he said something that those who knew the story recognized as a reference to his time with Marley. "Sometimes you need someone to show you that the divine isn't something you have to search for. It's something you have to remember you already carry inside you." The friendship between the two Bobs continued until Marley's death in 1981. Dylan attended Marley's funeral in Jamaica, and those present said he seemed to be in deep prayer throughout the service. In his private journals found after his death, Marley wrote about that February night, "Tonight I helped a lost prophet remember his mission. Brother Bob came to Jamaica carrying questions. He leaves carrying answers. Jah works through music, and music works through those humble enough to serve it." The impact of that 12-hour spiritual journey extended far beyond Dylan's Christian period. The understanding of music as divine communication, the practice of approaching creativity from a place of spiritual surrender, the recognition that art could be a form of worship. These insights influenced Dylan's work for the rest of his career. Musicians who worked with Dylan after his Jamaica experience said he approached recording sessions differently, with more reverence, more openness to spiritual guidance, more willingness to let something greater than his ego direct the creative process. The lesson of that night wasn't about ganja or Rastafarianism or even Christianity specifically. It was about the courage to open yourself to experiences that might fundamentally change you, and the recognition that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to help them remember their own divine nature. Bob Marley taught Bob Dylan to smoke ganja, but more importantly, he taught him to listen for the voice of God in his music. Their 12-hour spiritual journey didn't just create one album, it transformed how one of America's greatest artists understood his purpose and his craft. In a world that often treats spirituality and artistry as separate realms, their friendship proved that the greatest art comes from the deepest spiritual connection, and that sometimes you need a guide to help you find your way back to the divine source from which all creativity flows. And sometimes that guide comes in the form of a Rastafarian reggae singer who understands that music is prayer, ganja is sacrament, and every soul is carrying divine light that just needs the right conditions to remember how to shine. If this story moves you, remember that spiritual awakening can happen anywhere, through any tradition, with any guide who helps you remember that you are more than your fears, your failures, or your limited understanding of what's possible. Sometimes all it takes is 12 hours of sacred time with someone who can show you how to listen for the voice you've been carrying inside you all along.